Over the last 30 years, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has gained a reputation as one of the best and most innovative manga series ever created. But did you know that JoJo's creator, Hirohiko Araki's road to success is paved with countless controversies? Araki was born on June 7th, 1960 in Sendai, Japan, a city famous for its festivals. He became obsessed with all things manga and anime at a very early age. These interests were spearheaded by his hatred for his younger sisters. Araki has two younger, identical twin sisters, who he found very annoying, and by his own words, somewhat evil, which might explain his fascination and love for horror films. These movies would go on to influence several of his works. Some of his favorite films are the 1978 Dawn of the Dead, the 1997 Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Omen, Jeepers Creepers, and From Dusk Till Dawn. These are just a few of the 20 movies Araki claims influenced him in his horror analysis book. He basically loves all things spooky, vampires, zombies, cults, you name it. Araki cites his sister's annoyance as the reason he spent so much time alone in his room reading manga. He jokingly said in a lecture at Tokai Junior High School that he and his siblings would fight on a daily basis, and even said, quote, "If I had not started drawing manga, I might have gotten out of hand and killed them." In context, this was clearly a joke, but this did mean from a very early age, while they would play with each other, he would isolate himself and read his favorite mangas or watch his favorite animes. His favorite anime at the time was Tenjutsu 28, and the manga that was most important to him was Ayato Makoto. Though these series did have a major impact on him, Araki claims what finally motivated him to start drawing his own manga was when he discovered his father's art books, and by the end of the 4th grade, he had already completed his first works. He says the more he drew, the more he fell in love with the art form. But ironically, even though his father's art is what inspired him, his parents were not supportive of his new ambitions of being a professional manga artist. They instead pushed him to follow a more traditional salaryman route, which Araki hated the idea of. He is anything but traditional, which as you will see, will carry over into his adulthood. But being reluctant to give up, one day after school, he decided to show his friends some of the manga he had been working on. And surprisingly, unlike most of the kids I remember at this age, they were incredibly supportive, and they encouraged him to keep drawing. He remembers one kid saying, quote, "You are good at drawing manga." This was enough to stick with him and compelled him to believe in himself. We all just need that one person to believe in us. He decided from now on, he would do whatever it takes to achieve his dream. He began to draw every day, every chance he got, to the point he would even go behind his parents' back to draw when he was supposed to be doing chores, homework, or even sleeping. His interest in art would continue to grow, and as Araki got older, he fell in love with various art forms. His artistic influences were quite unorthodox when compared to most aspiring manga artists. Instead of pulling from just manga, he derived a lot of inspiration from artists from all mediums. For example, Araki fell in love with the works of French post-impressionist artist Paul Gauguin. Paul is known for his experimental use of bold colors, strong lines, and simplified forms, and his style would go on to influence many of Araki's mangas. Paul's colorways is where Araki drew from the most, particularly his use of color blocking and lively but unrealistic colors. With this style, Araki could make the skies yellow or the trees purple, and if he does it right, it'll work and be even more beautiful. Think of JoJo Part 4. This is one of my personal favorite parts, and the euphoric visuals are one of the main reasons I like it so much. Araki was now in his first year of high school, and he was more confident in his abilities, so he decided to start submitting his work to the manga publisher Shueisha in hopes of getting his ideas picked up for weekly serialization. Shueisha is the most famous manga publisher of all time, producing almost every popular shonen since the 1950s. Dragon Ball, One Piece, Bleach, and Naruto are just some of their biggest hits. But trust me, their run is incomprehensible, and they still have a stranglehold on the manga industry today, producing series like Demon Slayer and Jujutsu Kaisen. So it's no wonder why we cover them in almost every video in this series, because they are almost every aspiring manga artist's dream job. But for Araki, this dream was beginning to feel impossible, because all of the manga he was submitting that year was immediately rejected, and he just couldn't understand why. And around that time, Araki had heard about other manga artists his age making their official debuts, and him being the ambitious, kind of bizarre, but dedicated person he is, he decided to set out alone and travel all the way to Tokyo so he could show up at Shueisha's office to figure out why he was being rejected in person. He carried one of his manga with him to get reviewed. It was called Poker Underarms, and he had stayed up all night making it perfect, and he actually managed to talk his way in a meeting with one of the editors for the publisher. Araki has since spoke about this experience, and he admitted that the editor was highly critical of his manga, telling him all the things it lacked and everything he should be working on, but also that the editor did end the speech by saying that it has some potential and that he should clean it up and enter the up-and-coming Tezuka Awards, a competition for aspiring manga artists that the industry should be keeping their eyes on. As we've covered in our previous mangaka videos, manga artists artists like One Piece's Oda and Hunter x Hunter's Togashi are just a couple of successful creators that all got their start by placing in this award, so it's a big deal. So Araki took this advice to heart and spent the rest of high school honing his skills. After graduating, he enrolled at Miyagi University of Education, and he had decided to study design and fashion. While in high school, he had become obsessed with all the different fashion styles from around the world, and various other artists and a variety of mediums. Really just anything he found beautiful he became enamored with, which led him to falling in love with the works of Michelangelo, an Italian painter, sculptor, architect, and poet. Michelangelo is one of, if not the most famous and influential artists in the history of humans. And with his ability to create true beauty from nothing but marble or brushstrokes, it's no wonder why someone like Araki would be fascinated with him. Araki has paid homage to Michelangelo several times throughout his work. For example, Michelangelo's St. Peter has been referenced more than once. However, Araki drew the most inspiration from the poses and body dimensions used by Michelangelo. Michelangelo spent decades studying the human body. There is even an untitled 1-hour time-lapse video of Araki painting a JoJo artwork, and one of the references he pulls out to use is an art book called Michelangelo, A Complete Works by Lutz Hangsiger. This video is beautiful to watch and really demonstrates how much talent Araki really has. But as any real JoJo fan knows, it's the fashion that really makes Araki's work stand out. And it's thanks to his university years that he mastered the necessary skills to bring his visions to life. During his courses, he learned how to create unique clothing designs in high fashion. This would heavily impact his art style and subsequently impact manga, anime, and fashion's relationship forever. So trust me, when we get to the fashion and Araki's influence segment of this video, you will be mind blown about his achievements and the way he shifted culture. Although he had found all these new interests, by the age of 21, in his heart, he decided he still wanted to be a professional mangaka, but he felt like it was now or never. He felt like he had to get at least one manga accepted to Shueisha to not feel like a failure. With that mindset and his new skills, he drew over 100 pages of draft for a one-shot. It was a rework of Poker Underarms, a Western-themed manga about a duel between two gunmen over a game of poker. In 1980, Araki submitted this manga to the aforementioned Tezuka Awards in hopes of it being his official debut. Although it was highly criticized by one specific editor at Shueisha Shonen Jump, all the other editors and judges saw some potential in Araki, and Poker Underarms was selected as the runner-up in the Tezuka Awards. And it would act as his official debut with Shueisha, and be the start of his career as a working manga artist. This was a huge step forward in his dream, and acted as proof to Araki that hard work does pay off. Riding this high, Araki would pump out another Western-themed manga in 1981 called Outlaw Man. He then would switch it up, releasing a science fiction manga called Say Hi to Virginia. Each time Araki was improving, but none of these one-shots would be a big hit. And because Shueisha runs off this popularity style of serialization, that would mean none of these would get picked up for weekly releases. The true dream for most aspiring manga artists. So this was disheartening for Araki, who was usually a pretty confident guy. Now we know from our tragic rise of Hunter x Hunter video how dark weekly serializations can get, but regardless, it is still a highly honorable achievement. And lucky for Araki, this dream would come true in 1983 when he submitted his next work, Cool Shock BT, a series about a young magician who solves mysteries and crimes. Of course, because this is Araki, this manga wasn't as straightforward as it sounds. And later on in the video, you will figure out how he really likes Sherlock Holmes. It's not stated, but maybe this was inspired by that. This is around the point where I feel like Araki was really starting to find his famous and unique style. His designs and topics were getting better, and just a little more weird. This was also the first time Araki used his famous pseudonym. Cool Shock BT debuted in Shueisha's weekly magazine Fresh Jump, but unfortunately, it was just too different from what Jump readers were used to, and it would be cancelled after only 6 chapters. Shueisha is notorious for being cutthroats. If your manga loses readers' attention, they will drop you without a second thought. But Araki was resilient as ever. He didn't let these back-to-back L's hold him back. He truly believed his style was special, so he began to brainstorm his next idea. And in 1984, Araki released Bao. Bao tells the story of a 17-year-old who is kidnapped and implanted with a parasite by an evil organization, which transforms him into Bao, a bioweapon with superhuman powers. We now follow his crusade against the evil scientist. Bao was a massive leap forward in the quality of Araki's manga. The art and designs in this series are very good. The story concept and world building was great and unique. Bao's drawings was just so much better than his previous works, but the dialogue and the writing itself wasn't amazing. It was good, but he would definitely get a lot better. This was also his first story that showcased his signature amount of gore. He was experimenting with ways of blending his love for the horror genre into his style, but sadly, Bao would only last 9 chapters before also being canned. I feel like if Shueisha would have given the readers a chance to understand Araki's style, this series might have made it, as Araki's style sometimes has to grow on you. I mean, how many people dropped JoJo during part 1? At least once. Not me, I mean, I would never do that. To be honest, Bao still holds up to this day, and was honestly kind of ahead of its time, with the recent rise of shonen seinen blend like with Chainsaw Man and Hell's Paradise. Proof of its quality is that 5 years after it was cancelled, Bao would be adapted into an OVA. But as for now, Araki had to keep grinding, and the next one-shot he would release would foreshadow his lifelong fight to follow his heart and create what he wants despite cultural norms. In 1985, Araki released a manga that he was inspired to make after visiting Italy, and it was titled Gorgeous Irene, a story about a female assassin who is extremely skilled and is only known to her enemies as Gorgeous Irene. By using her makeup as a weapon, she can transform into any type of woman she needs to be to accomplish a mission. Along with some badass fighting skills and some unique weapons, it was super cool and fun. And I feel like Araki was really onto something with this one. It was so unique for the time, and it showed his ability to bring the truly bizarre to life in a way that was still digestible. Out of all of his early works, Irene felt the most JoJo. Some of the characters are insane and pretty, and some are insane and buff, and some are pretty, insane, and buff. It also showcased exaggerated character designs, but the most JoJo thing I felt while reading this was the fights. They were both badass and ridiculous. One of the main reasons I like JoJo so much is because it's both serious and fun. Araki has a talent that no matter how weird some things in his story are, you are still able to suspend your disbelief because he makes it make sense with his world building. Araki was just born into the wrong era, where freedom of art wasn't prevalent. Publishers back then didn't want to be innovative. They wanted to repeat what was already working. And even though Gorgeous Irene was incredible and his best work yet, it wouldn't even get past the very first stages of approval. Why? Well, they said it was great, but they couldn't publish it because he had created a female protagonist. He was rejected because Shonen Jump didn't think it would be suitable for his male audience to see a strong female lead, that it would go against their target demographic. If you ask me, they should have left it up to their audience to decide and just cut it like they do all the others if they don't become popular. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. Should they have given Gorgeous Irene a shot, or from a business standpoint were they smart to reject it when they did? Either way, Araki would get his revenge. Araki was now 26 years old, and he had spent the 6 years since his manga debut being rejected and told to conform his style to be more normal. This realization was causing him to begin to lose faith in his abilities and slip into a depression, pondering the idea of what it truly meant to be a professional manga artist. In his eyes, being an artist was the freedom to create his vision of beauty, and then to be able to let the world decide for themselves whether he was talented or not. But the harsh reality of the politics and red tape that exists within real-world corporations was hitting him like a bullet train. On top of that, two young mangaka that debuted in the same class as Araki, Yoshinori Naki and Takashi Shimada, were seeing massive amounts of success with their hit joint manga series Kinnikuman. The wrestling manga was selling millions of copies and even got greenlit for an anime adaptation. Araki did consider this duo his friends, so he was very happy for them. But this did add to his feeling that maybe he just didn't have what it takes. Disheartening questions started to cloud his mind on the daily. Was his parents right all along? Should he give up and get a normal job before it's too late? During his soul searching, he had an epiphany. He still wanted to be a manga artist more than anything else in the world, and he would give it one last shot and put everything he had into his next creation. Araki would implement all of the best things he learned from his previous works, but also took an analytical look at the current manga trends. That way he could package his unique style in a way that was appealing to the masses and Shueisha. During the 1980s, from popular manga series to Hollywood blockbusters, the prominent theme for all media was jacked, sweaty, and veiny dudes. The buffer the better. Araki would combine this trend with his eccentric ideas, and with his hormone-infused pen, he began drafting the paradigm-shifting manga JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Phantom Blood. Phantom Blood was a captivating story that follows Jonathan Joestar, the heir to the wealthy Joestar family, and his adopted brother Dio Brando, who had a nefarious scheme to take the fortune for himself. JoJo featured handsome buff dudes, Araki's love for the horror genre with all the implementations of vampires and ghouls, and his signature love for body gore, while also sprinkling in some popular shonen manga tropes. Though part 1 regularly ranks low in people's JoJo rankings, on its own it's very good, and it sets the foundation for everything else in the series. After I finished JoJo in its entirety, I rewatched part 1, and I enjoyed it a lot more than the first time, and it gave me a newfound appreciation for the foresight Araki had from the very beginning. JoJo would basically be greenlit immediately, and would release in Shonen Jump on January 1st, 1987 for weekly serialization. Now, it was wasn't an instant hit, but it did garner a small cult-like fan base that would carry it long enough for its popularity to pick up. Though Araki's editor at the time did have to beg Jump not to cancel JoJo after parts 1 and 2 wasn't ranking high enough on their popularity polls. These polls are how Shueisha determines what series stays and what series goes, and Jump was notoriously cutthroat with axing any unpopular manga. And really, it was just unlucky for Araki that the manga charts were stacked in the late 80s, with series like Dragon Ball and Saint Seiya dominating the charts. But there was another manga that was popular that was actually one of Araki's favorites, and it even inspired elements of his own works. This was the legendary manga Fist of the North Star, a series set in a post-apocalyptic world where the earth is barren and the strong survive. It featured swole dudes and incredible art, and it would go on to be massively influential in its own right, as Araki himself has stated that he had two main influences for the overarching appearances of his early JoJo characters, and the first was Tetsuhara's Fist of the North Star. Not only did it influence JoJo, but his previous series Bao as well. To see Haru's influence on JoJo, just take a look at how Kenshiro and Jonathan share very similar designs, especially when you compare the manga versions of the two. Araki and Haru are actually pretty close friends and ex-co-workers. The two successful mangaka still routinely go out for dinner to this day and have done joint interviews together. The second overarching influence for Araki's characters was the sculpture works of Michelangelo. Now, as for the specific concepts for the protagonist Jonathan, the antagonist Dio, and really the overall idea for part 1 came from Araki's love for the aforementioned 80s action movie scene, particularly the stars of the films. The biggest Hollywood blockbusters at the time were films like The Terminator and Rocky. In an interview, Araki said that he would watch actors like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, who were just covered in muscles, and it would make him think, quote, who actually is the strongest person in the world? This question led him to themes such as immortality, justice, and lots of other things that humans innately seek on a philosophical level. These concepts would go on to be implemented throughout the series. As for the iconic name JoJo, he conceived of it at a Denny's, while him and his first editor Ryosuke Kawashima were brainstorming ideas for his next manga. They wanted something simple that readers could remember very easily, so the two agreed on the name Jonathan for the protagonist. His editor also said that one thing Araki was adamant about was that the protagonist had to have matching initials like one of his favorite film directors, Steven Spielberg, abbreviated SS. He always thought this was really neat, so they came up with the name Jonathan Joestar, or JoJo for short. He landed on the name Dio because he wanted something that sounded cool next to JoJo, and Dio is the Italian word for God, which might explain Dio's whole God complex thing. According to Araki, Dio's physical appearance though is inspired by Rutger Hauer's character Roy Batty from the 1982 film Blade Runner. Araki originally meant for JoJo to be a trilogy, and for it to end in modern Japan in part 3, with the very first Japanese protagonist in the series. The other parts had foreign protagonists. He felt that 3 parts were the perfect amount of time to tell Dio's defeat through a chain of events and lifetimes. While drafting part 2 though, he was pushed by Jump to do a tournament style arc, which was very popular at the time thanks to series like Dragon Ball. But Araki wanted to save it for part 3, the finale. When part 3 arrived though, he got the idea to flip the concept by giving the characters an overarching adventure and goals, and to make the fights act as checkpoints for the protagonist, something they had to overcome along the way. This was inspired from a book he liked called Around the World in 80 Days. Araki also decided to incorporate some of his more bizarre ideas in part 3, things he had been workshopping for a while now, as he was now growing more confident in his style. He had no idea how well his vision would work. JoJo's Bizarre Adventures Part 3, Stardust Crusaders, would skyrocket JoJo's popularity across Japan. Fortunate for us, this led Araki to deciding to continue the series and gave him more leverage while pitching to his editors his more eccentric ideas, because now he was officially a successful manga artist. We won't be doing a deep dive into each JoJo part in this video, as that can and might be an entire video on its own, but I do feel it's important to cover specifically what makes part 3 so special. That isn't to say that part 3 is perfect, but it's arguably JoJo's most necessary part. If I had to break down the 3 most important elements of Stardust Crusaders, it would be the group dynamic, Jotaro Kujo, and of course, stands, and more stands. Stardust Crusaders' introduction of the gang element of JoJo is a critical plot device that elevated JoJo to the next level in terms of writing and story. JoJo's writing progressively gets better from part to part, but part 3 structure started Araki's new style of storytelling, while part 3 was the first to introduce an entire diverse cast of main characters. Characters that each would have their own goals, dramas, and eccentric personalities. These unique personalities interacting with each other led to many of JoJo's first and most hilarious hilariously memeable moments. Memeability in itself is an important aspect of JoJo's success on its own, but I feel it falls under the group umbrella mostly, because it's only thanks to this group element that this type of comedy works so well. Knowing who the characters are lets you suspend your disbelief in some of the more ridiculous moments. Think of your favorite funny JoJo moment. There is a good chance that it involves 2 or more of the main crew of said part. While part 3 does also introduce the most popular lead protagonist, it's the group dynamic and their interactions that really gives part 3 that charm. A charm that JoJo will become known for. But the fact still stands that many of part 3's most best or most emotional moments didn't even have Jotaro in the scene. Stardust Crusaders was actually about the Stardust Crusaders, and this plot device will carry over into each part and become a backbone of JoJo. I mean, could you even imagine part 5 without all the members of Team Bucciarati? All that being said, part 3 wouldn't be as paradigm shifting as it was without the one and only Jotaro Kujo. Jotaro is a one-of-a-kind protagonist, and this is evident from the very beginning, from his unorthodox introduction. I mean, how many heroes make their entrance from a jail cell? With a menacing look that was almost downright scary. Hell, he was even mean to his loving mother. A much different aura that surrounded the protagonist of parts 1 and 2. Jotaro was a Japanese delinquent with a rough attitude, but he also has a gentle heart and he is loyal to those he likes and trusts. And his look in part 3 will become iconic. He is definitely one of the primary reasons for JoJo's meteoric rise, and he basically has become an idol in Japan. He would go on to become one of the most important characters in the entire series. Many view him as the face of the JoJo franchise, and he has been voted the most popular JoJo character in various polls throughout the years, and for good reason. If you remember, Araki had planned for part 3 to be the final part of JoJo, and for his third protagonist to be his first Japanese main character, meaning Araki has probably always planned to put a lot of eggs in the Jotaro basket. This becomes more obvious when you learn about the inspirations behind the stoic character. Araki based Jotaro off one of Hollywood's most legendary and badass acting legends, Clint Eastwood. Clint has starred in many classic and highly acclaimed movies with a career spanning decades. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Dirty Harry, Gran Torino, and pretty much every iconic gunslinging movie ever made. He usually plays some sort of rough version of a hero, handing out his own brand of no-nonsense justice. Araki has called Clint his hero on more than one occasion. In volume 8 of Junjonium, Araki stated, quote, "Clint Eastwood, who I love and respect as an actor, served as a model for Jotaro. Jotaro's trademark pose, where he points his finger, actually was inspired by Eastwood pointing his .44 Magnum. That's why Jotaro seems a bit rougher when compared to other Jump protagonists. Joseph might have been a little easier to get into from a Weekly Shonen Jump perspective, but Jotaro actually fits my image of a hero to a T." He went on to say, quote, "My image of a hero is that of a loner, as opposed to someone who does the right thing for compensation or attention. My ideal hero is someone who is an unappreciated symbol of justice. There are times when the correct path leads to loneliness." Jotaro goes on his journey while keeping his feelings bottled up inside, because he is a lone hero. He doesn't celebrate in an over-the-top manner when he defeats an enemy. For him, a throwaway "good grief" is plenty. If you've seen any Clint Eastwood movies, you can very easily see the influence. And in 2012, Araki actually met his hero. He gifted the Academy Award-winning actor an official framed illustration of Jotaro and Iggy from the Joe Minion book cover. And Clint Eastwood, proving he is just as cool as he seems on camera, posed as Jotaro Kujo in a side-by-side panel of the magazine's illustration cover. If you read part 7, you can kind of see how Clint Eastwood's influence carried over even that far into the series. Alright kiddos, I made you wait long enough. The thing that made it where it's forbidden to drop JoJo before reaching part 3. A topic us JoJo fans can't talk about enough. Part 3 is where we first get introduced to stands. Alright, so basically in part 3, Araki decided to move away from his previous primary power system Harmon and focus on his new idea for a power system called stands. And since then, his fanbase can't get enough of them. They are a very unique, badass, and versatile power system. Stands are a visual manifestation of life energy, an actual ghost-like entity generated by its owner. It typically hovers over or near its user and possesses a wide variety of abilities based somewhat on the user's personality. As the series progresses, these stands' abilities will grow more unique, powerful, and sometimes complicated. Cough cough King Crimson. Araki initially started conceiving of the idea for stands while focusing on his fascination with spiritualism and his love for yokai folklore. He also was particularly interested in the Shinto religion's idea of otherworldly beings protecting you, though later he found more inspiration about guardian spirits through the manga Yushiro no Hakitoro, opting to take the idea of various psychic powers and turn them into a spirit-like entity summoned by the main character. Ironically, even though they would wind up helping launch the JoJo manga into stardom, when Araki first pitched stands, they were actually a hard sell to his editor. The editor tried to persuade Araki away from trying to change his power system mid-series, thinking it was a bad idea and that it would confuse readers. Araki claims he doesn't blame his editor for being against it because he said he had a hard time trying to explain his idea for stands and overall what they really was. But after they came up with a few stand concepts together, he was given the go-ahead, and stands would change the flow of the story completely. The original stands in part 3 were based on tarot cards. This predated the iconic music naming theme that would become more prevalent in parts 4 and on, where Araki would name many of the stands and or their abilities after artists, albums, and songs. But we would get to how music impacted JoJo soon. Araki has stated that he had a blast while coming up with stands. In fact, after part 3, Araki decided he would always design a character stand first, and then afterward create the character associated with said stand, and then the character's personality. He thinks that this formula creates a perfect harmony, and given his many wonderful characters, he might be onto something. Araki takes character design and development very seriously, and he creates entire detailed character sheets with the character's personality traits, hobbies, and entire backstories on them, even if their actual backstory doesn't make it into the series. He said that this helps him know what decisions the characters would make because he knows who they are as a person, even if they're just a side character. An example of a character's background that didn't make it into the story was with my favorite villain in the series, Kira. Kira actually has an origin story of how he ended up how he did, but Araki opted to not add it to the part because he thought it would make people sympathize with Kira or turn him into some kind of anti-hero. Araki said that he wanted to draw Kira in a way where he stays an antagonist and doesn't become a protagonist over time, like we sometimes see with other manga, where the bad guy basically becomes one of the boys. Quick fact about part 4, Araki said that Diamond is Unbreakable was influenced by him reading a lot of novels by Stephen King in the 80s and 90s. He especially liked the book Misery, and added that back then he was also obsessed with books on serial killers. He wanted to understand the motivation of serial killers, saying, quote, "Why would you be born a human and do things like this?" Araki describes the theme for part 4 as, quote, "Horror may be lying right behind our everyday lives," similar to one of his favorite books and movies, Silence of the Lamb. But there is another novel of a slightly different genre that might be more influential to part 4 and really all of JoJo than anything we covered so far, the mystery novel Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Araki has went as far to tell the Japanese literary magazine Kotoba that he never would have created JoJo's Bizarre Adventure if he hadn't read the Sherlock Holmes stories. Holmes' genius-like observational skills, combined with his antisocial tendencies, makes him a compelling and mysterious character to Araki. Quote, "What makes Holmes great is that he may be a genius, but he's also clearly a jerk. Holmes is often depicted as a lone wolf, and the few friends he has, it's hard for him to open up to." While describing Holmes, Araki would say, "I've often thought that one of the conditions for being a hero is loneliness. When push comes to shove, a hero has to be able to fight and solve a case by themselves. Otherwise, you can't call them a hero. You wouldn't even be able to say that they suit the role of a protagonist of a series." As you can probably tell, this is the same reasoning behind his love for Clint Eastwood's characters. It really explains the philosophy of Araki's ideal hero and why Jotaro turned out the way he did. Sherlockian traits also appear in one of my favorite characters, Rohan Sensei. Araki claims he sees Rohan as a very Holmes-like character because of his endless curiosity and tendency to perceive other human beings as research subjects. I've also read that he used Rohan as a sort of self-insert, so maybe this lone hero type is something that Araki has always felt he was or inspires to be. He has always went against the grain and succeeded by doing things his own way. We mentioned earlier how Sherlock Holmes inspired Araki's previous work, Cool Shock BT, but it's cool to see how far into his career his earliest influences manifest. He has even said that the setting for part 1 Phantom Blood was inspired by Sherlock, with the England location, thick fog, and a castle hidden away from the world containing an aura of mystery. In parts 4 and 5, we would start seeing a huge shift in the JoJo aesthetic. By now, Araki had grown tired of the extra buff look. He also mentioned that around this time, muscle men in general was starting to lose popularity with readers. So Araki opted for slimmer character designs, and he used this opportunity to lean into his love for fashion. JoJo characters had always been fashionable, but part 4 would start the iconic high fashion looks that JoJo would become known for. Motivated by his stranger ideas in part 3 only making JoJo more popular, he would lean confidently into his vision, hoping it would allow him to accomplish even his most ambitious dreams. And if you would like to help me accomplish my own dreams of becoming the king of anime YouTube, just like this video and subscribe. The like goal for this video will be 211 likes. One of the coolest parts of JoJo is we get to see Araki finding and mastering his style style part to part. When you think of JoJo, you probably think of things like incredible fashion, iconic poses, and niche references. And in my opinion, the second half of the series is where this truly manifests. Araki begins to focus more on his love for abstract color palettes that was inspired by the aforementioned artist Paul Gauguin, as well as his other ideas inspired by various artists and fashion designers. Tony Vermontes is another important but underrated artist that has heavily impacted JoJo. Tony was an American artist that was trained in Los Angeles and New York City. He found success in Europe and Japan as a fashion illustrator and photographer. Tony's major influences can be seen as far back as Part 2, but would increase as poses in JoJo became more and more integral throughout the series. There is even a cool Reddit post detailing some of Tony's references in JoJo. Antonio Lopez is another one of Araki's heroes that deserves an honorable mention. His designs are often covered in detailed patterns and loads of jewelry. They can be seen in the golden badges Jotaro and Josuke wear in Part 4, and his influences carries over to the flashy suit scene in Part 5. One of the coolest art references in JoJo is in Dio's iconic pose. This was inspired by the famous painting called Haute Couture by Nina Ritchie, 1984. Poses are just as synonymous with JoJo as the characters that do them, and most of the poses were inspired by the same fashion models and designers that inspired JoJo's fashion. Araki cites Christian Dior and Versace as immense inspiration to him while creating clothing and pose concepts. Many of them come from watching runway models pose in fashion shows and fashion magazines like Vogue or Chanel. Araki has spoke on his fashion creation process, stating, "When I create character outfits, I am conscious of two elements, daily life and fantasy." He told Anime News Network, quote, "I envision everyday fashion alongside strange, cartoonish, bizarre clothing that would be impractical in real life." While researching for this video, I discovered an entire class led by fashion school graduates, dedicated to breaking down how high fashion impacted JoJo and how JoJo impacted high fashion. Wanting to earn your respect as the most dedicated YouTuber on the platform and to be able to do JoJo justice, I called out of work and drove hours to attend this class. And I was flabbergasted at the wide variety of the deep designer cuts Araki studied to be able to bring his love for fashion into the world of JoJo. An example of a big influence I didn't know about before this class was an American Chinese designer, Anna Sue. She founded her brand in the mid-1980s and was a rebel in her own right. She was infamous for rejecting the 80s professional wardrobe in favor of punk influences, a style that wasn't respected in the high fashion industry at the time. She would go on to be incredibly influential. This is just one of the dozens of designers they covered that Araki studied. I also learned how Araki's unique and amazing designs are influencing a new generation of designers to be free. An example they gave is that there's this popping fashion designer named Lisa Motoshi who is based out of New York. She is currently making major waves in the fashion scene, and they talked about how they feel her designs are inspired by JoJo. And while comparing some of her most popular clothing designs, styles, and even colorways to JoJo, I definitely see the Araki influence. But what do you think? Can you see it? Araki has this awesome ability to find inspiration in almost anything, and he has a strong appreciation for all forms of art. This brings us to another very important medium to both JoJo and Araki's life, and that's music. Music has always played a huge part of inspiration for Araki, but Part 4 is when he famously started to name his stands and their abilities off of songs, musicians, and albums he likes.
I keep having this nagging feeling that I've forgotten something.
Hey, if you forgot it, it probably wasn't all that important.
Yeah, I guess.
But it really goes even deeper than that. I found articles claiming that this goes as far back as Jonathan and Dio's names being partially influenced by music as well. Apparently, Jonathan was inspired by a Beatles song called Get Back, and Dio's from the heavy metal singer Ronnie James Dio from the band Dio. The Zeppelin surname that was prevalent throughout this series is named after the legendary rock band Led Zeppelin. I'm not even gonna attempt to go over every single Stan music reference in the series because that would easily add another hour to this video. But this is just some of Araki's music references that makes JoJo basically act as a playlist suggestion by Araki. Josuke's stand, Crazy Diamond, is inspired by Shine On You Crazy Diamond by Pink Floyd. The stand Gold Experience is inspired by the album The Gold Experience by artist Prince. And Prince might actually be Araki's favorite musician of all time, as I think he might be the most referenced musician in JoJo. Besides the stand reference, there are several outfits in JoJo that are directly inspired by Prince's on-stage outfits, like Josuke's and Bucciarati's. And Araki has even said that one of Josuke's hobbies is listening to Prince CDs. In 2021, Billboard Japan was working on an article about Prince's influence, and they reached out to Araki as one of Prince's biggest fans. Araki obliged, saying, quote, "If it's for Prince." During this interview, Araki was asked what he is currently listening to, he replied that he may not reference them in stand names very often, but he does really enjoy Pharrell Williams' group Nerd and Bruno Mars and Mark Ransom's group Uptown Funk, claiming they are similar to Prince with their unique sounds and weird 1980s beats. He says he sees Prince vibes even in the stars of today's youth, like Billie Eilish and her debut album When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? This article really shows the extent of Araki's respect for Prince and music overall. By the way, I should mention that Billie Eilish herself seems to be a JoJo fan, with many of her outfits seemingly being inspired by JoJo characters, pictures of her doing JoJo poses, and she even has posted a picture rocking a shirt with Dio art on it. A few other stands with musical references are The Notorious B.I.G., Weather Report, Green Day, Vanilla Ice, and Killer B. One of my personal favorite stands, Sex Pistols, is also a band reference. If you can't tell, Araki's music taste transcends genres. In an interview with Shonen Jump, he was asked what he's been listening to recently, and he said, "I'm currently listening to Kanye West and Tim McGraw. These people are basically polar opposites. Bro really doesn't discriminate. He likes what he likes." I know that there is many musical references I didn't mention, so make sure you let us know in the comments your favorite musical reference in JoJo or any I missed you think's important. But one fact that I think is random but so cool is that Araki uses music in real life to set the tone for him while he is writing and drawing manga. And an example of this is while Araki was drawing Golden Wind, he listened to a lot of rap music to bring out a rougher atmosphere for the part as a whole. And his favorite album from that time period is Snoop Dogg's classic album Doggy Style. With Araki implementing banger idea after another, JoJo was continuing to become more and more successful each year, which was great for Araki, but as we learned from our previous videos, the more popular something gets, the more likely it is to fall into controversies. This is the many controversies of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Ironically, it was actually Araki's love for music that would lead him to his first controversy. As JoJo's popularity started to grow outside of Japan, it was only a matter of time before it made it to the West, which is the home of many of the musicians he had been using for his naming themes. It was fine when it was only known to the Japanese people, but worldwide notoriety made things more complicated. Being notoriously weary of lawsuits, English localized production companies forced Araki to change many of the music theme names due to copyright, if he ever wanted a chance at the Western market. Therefore, Crazy Diamond becomes Shining Diamond, Gold Experience is now Golden Wind, the eerie Killer Queen was changed to Deadly Queen, and some stands' names just became shorter, like the Red Hot Chili Pepper became the non-suable Chili Pepper. Sex Pistols was changed to Six Pistols, which luckily still kind of fit the theme of the user since Mista's weapon of choice was a revolver. If you're interested, there's an entire list of these changes online. Now, though this is more of a minor controversy, it wouldn't be the last controversy JoJo had to endure by trying to expand to a Western audience. So if you notice, even though by this point JoJo has gained worldwide notoriety, we still haven't mentioned the anime adaptation, even though less popular manga during this time period were being adapted. In fact, it wasn't until 2012, on JoJo's 25th anniversary, that David Production would announce their plans to completely animate parts 1 and 2 of the series. This would become the JoJo Bizarre Adventures anime we know and love today. So why did it take a quarter century for JoJo to get an anime? Of course, some of the reason was the legal nightmare of the band and song names used, but the main reason was because there actually was an original JoJo animation that took place years earlier that ended in controversy, leaving massive PR problems for any other animation company that even dared to touch the franchise. In 1993, the original JoJo's Bizarre Adventure anime would be produced by APPP Studio. They would opt to animate the later half of Part 3, Stardust Crusaders. It was adapted and released straight to VHS and Laserdisc. There were 6 episodes total. 7 years later, in the year 2000, the first part of Stardust Crusaders would release to VHS and DVD, mainly because fans were kind of confused entering Stardust Crusaders at the end of the arc, not knowing how they got there. The reason they did the later half first was the idea of animating the most exciting parts of the arc because it was all they were able to do at the time, and I guess they kind of assumed maybe you've already read the manga. The entire OVA would eventually be dubbed and released in the United States on DVDs in 2003. However, any and all distribution in the United States and Japan will be completely halted after controversy exploded when there was a scene animated that depicted Dio, the lead antagonist, reading out of the Quran. Apparently, this caused controversy in both America and from an anonymous Egyptian Islamic fundamentalist group, and then eventually Japan. And you're probably thinking, it couldn't have been that big of a deal, especially when you compare it to some of the things that get animated today.
Oh my god!
but it was actually an international problem. There was a recall on all JoJo animations. Then APP opted to not animate any more of the manga to avoid backlash. In 2007, APPP would produce a Phantom Blood movie to commemorate the 25th anniversary of Araki's manga career. It was given a limited theatrical release, but after that, the movie was never seen publicly or released to home video. To this day, it's considered lost media, other than a few trailers and 15 minutes of the movie floating around online. This recall also affected English releases of the manga, and eventually both American distributors like Viz Media and Japan's Shueisha would cease all publication of the JoJo series in its entirety. Shueisha would go on to force Araki to redraw several panels in the manga, like ones depicting characters fighting on top of a mosque. He had to do this before future printings of the series would be allowed. Jason Thompson, artist, author, and critic, has included Shueisha's changes to the manga on his list of the greatest censorship fails. In my personal opinion, I think the entire controversy was overblown, but I do think it happened for a reason, as JoJo would eventually land in the right hands with David Production, who would go on to animate all of the current 6 parts of the series. I feel like they was able to capture Araki's style perfectly, and I couldn't imagine it done by anyone else. I would even say they elevated the JoJo experience. I'm not saying that the anime is better than the manga, but manga and anime are 2 different mediums, and if an anime is done right, it can give you an equally as amazing but different feeling than the manga. The music, voice acting, style, animation, the openings, and just the overall artistic direction of David Productions' JoJo is a masterpiece. You can tell they actually care about the series, and I feel like they did Araki justice. The next controversy is a little bit more complicated because it's something that Araki has been battling his whole career. People trying to limit his artistic freedom and forcing him to conform his ideas to what they think will work. And particularly this time, I'm referencing male versus female leads, and this goes way deeper than you might think. As most of you know, Part 6, Stone Ocean, introduced the first main female lead protagonist, Jolene, whose name is also a musical reference to the famous Dolly Parton song, Jolene. If you look up Part 6 on Google or Reddit, there are countless threads discussing why or if it's bad. I even found an article called Why Stone Ocean is So Loathed by Fans. I personally like it, and I don't think that Part 6 is disliked overall, but there is a very vocal minority. Now, of course, my own opinion is anecdotal, as I know many people who like the part, but it's fair to say that it is JoJo's most debated part. While I know Jolene's gender is not the only reason Stone Ocean is controversial today, when you look at Part 6's history, you'll see why it deserves to be on this list. When Araki was creating Stone Ocean back in the late 1990s, both his editor and publisher tried to persuade him to making Jolene a male protagonist instead of a female lead. His editor at the time, Azuma, has since went on record saying, "At the time of serialization, I tried to convince Araki to make Jolene a male character instead, because a strong female protagonist wouldn't work well in a magazine meant for boys." Also, if you remember Gorgeous Irene, this wasn't the first time he was hit with this same artistic roadblock. This time though, Araki had the clout he needed to rebel against his publisher's wishes, so he insisted on Jolene staying, and he told them he wouldn't budge. Araki would say to his editor, quote, "The reader not being able to accept a female protagonist is exactly the reason Jolene had to be a woman." But there is actually more to the story of why Araki feels so strongly about this. Jolene actually wasn't Araki's first attempt at a lead female protagonist in JoJo. According to Hiroshi Sikia, Araki's then editor, when Araki was starting Part 5 Golden Wind, he had originally planned to make the protagonist a woman. Quote, "Araki initially threw around the idea of making Part 5's protagonist a female character. However, he discussed it with his editor at the time, who thought that a female lead would be a tough sell for the Weekly Shonen Jump readers, and eventually the protagonist ended up being a young man." Sikia noted that Giorno's Japanese name, Hirono Shibana, is feminine. Although it wouldn't be until Part 6 when Araki would be able to force his way through the cultural norms of shonen manga, he didn't actually fully submit in this Part 5 debate either. More notes from Sikia reveals that Giorno's stand, Gold Experience's ability to give life, is reminiscent of a woman's ability to create life. It's sort of an Easter egg for his original vision for the part. But he would go on even further to say that Araki purposely made Giorno somewhat androgynous because he played around with the idea of revealing that Giorno was actually a woman looking like a man later in Part 5. Which is kind of funny when you think about it, because his editors were like, "No Araki, no female leads." And Araki was like, "Okay, but now you're about to get decades of the prettiest males you've ever seen in your life." I like to think that with Part 5 being set in Italy and Gorgeous Irene being inspired by his trip to Italy years earlier, this was Araki's attempt at revenge for Shueisha never giving Irene the chance it deserved. But it is nice to know that Irene does make her way into the JoJo series, kind of comes full circle. Okay, so this is more of a theory than a controversy. And no, it's not the Araki is a vampire himself theory, even though that one one might be true. I mean, really, does this guy ever age? He does not look like he's in his 60s. It's actually that Araki predicted 9/11.
You're joking about that, right?
No, I'm not joking. So it goes like this. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 3, Stardust Crusaders, was serialized in Shonen Jump from 1989 to 1993. During the part, we get introduced to a manga stand whose ability allows it to predict the future via abstract illustrations. In one panel, a prophet stand wearing a shirt that appears to read 9/11 is impaled on a telephone pole from a great height. Below him, an evil-looking plane passes by, which is already kind of spooky, but in another panel, the same character wearing a shirt that clearly reads 9/11 checks his watch, and the time is 10:30. Over 10 years later, the second tower fell at 10:28. Mix in the fact that several of Araki's characters have the power of time manipulation or seeing the future, and you got plenty for conspiracy theorists to work with. This theory actually picked up so much traction that Araki himself was asked about the mystery in an interview with idol singer and voice actress Shoko Nakagawa. He said he doesn't even remember drawing the scene. Quote, "I don't know why I drew such a scene. I don't even know what it means," which is exactly what a time-traveling, future-telling vampire would say. JoJo's Bizarre Adventures has now sold over 120 million copies, making it one of the highest-selling and most influential mangas of all time. With so many references in media that the meme, "Is that a JoJo reference?" is one of the biggest memes in anime. The anime adaptation is considered a modern classic. Araki himself is respected by the biggest manga artists in the world, with manga artists like Bleach's Kubo, Death Note's Obata, One Piece's Oda, Naruto's Kishimoto, as well as 18 others all came together and celebrated JoJo's 25th anniversary with tribute art, drawing JoJo characters in their respective styles. Araki has partnered with many of the fashion brands that inspired him. This includes a Gucci collaboration in 2011, where the Gucci store in Shinjuku hosted an exhibit that featured a collab with the luxury brand itself, JoJo's creator, and the fashion magazine Spur. It was called Rohan Goes to Gucci. The exhibit featured a life-size figure of Rohan, as well as numerous illustrations by Araki, including actual pieces of the brand's 2011-2012 fall-winter collection, plus Araki's own original fashion designs. For Spur, Araki drew a Rohan meets Gucci full-color one-shot that ran in their October 2011 issue. The success of the collab led Spur to once again running a JoJo spin-off by Araki called Jolene, Fly High with Gucci, starring Park Sex's Jolene, in their February 2013 issue of their fashion magazine. This is just a couple of the many fashion collabs Araki would go on to do, but his influences even transcend manga and fashion. JoJo in Paris was a special exhibition held in April of 2003 at the Audemars Piguet Gallery in Paris. This was an important event, as it was the first time Araki exposed his original artwork to the world. Araki has mentioned that this event was an influential moment for him because it was the first time he realized that even people who didn't read his manga would appreciate his work. He had met this little girl and an old man who had never read his work before, but they still stopped and took time to praise his art. This would also be a prophetic event, as a decade later in 2012, Araki himself was one of only 5 artists picked for the Musée du Louvre to create original artwork for the world-famous Louvre Art Museum, the most popular art museum in the world and home to arguably the most famous painting of all time, the Mona Lisa. Araki's piece, Rohan at the Louvre, starred at the exhibit as an attempt to show the diversity of comic and manga art. The goal was to help push the narrative that manga art is real art forward. As we covered in previous videos, unfortunately some artists and art teachers have a disdain for manga art and don't consider it real art. But Rohan at the Louvre would go on to be highly praised. In the following year, it was published in France and ran in Japan's Ultra Jump. After researching it, I love this series so much that I had to buy the graphic novel myself to truly appreciate Araki's art in person, and it's currently one of my favorite things I own. The fashion department store Lumaine, the American biological journal Cell, and even the luxury car brand Mercedes-Benz are just a few more of Araki's impressive collaborations. But one of Araki's proudest releases is a book he wrote called Manga Theory and Practice: The Craft of Creating Manga. It's a comprehensive guide and advice on how to create manga and have good storytelling. It had almost perfect scores on every site I checked, and I hope to add a physical copy to my own collection one day, but as for now, I'm currently running low on cheddar cheese, so I'll have to wait. Though Araki himself has plenty of money these days, but it's nice to know it hasn't changed him at all. In an interview with his wife, she details how sometimes it feels like she is is living with a first-year middle schooler and a childish troublemaker, and how it's hilariously mind-blowing that the respectable adult and popular jump rider Araki has run around their neighborhood playing Ding Dong Dash countless times.
A menace!
She says the older people love him and call out to Araki like a little boy. All of her Araki stories are so funny and wholesome to imagine, but it's not just his neighbors. All of Japan loves and respects Araki. There are JoJo-themed escape rooms, arcade, the amazing JoJo bar, and many other attractions showcasing their admiration. Araki has came a long way from that kid who was constantly getting rejected by manga publishers and having his ambitious ideas destroyed before they even had a chance. To me, this makes JoJo one of the most important mangas ever made, as it proved to manga publishers that it's okay to be different. Thanks to Araki, the world is filled with many wonderfully bizarre manga and anime, but it's thanks to you all watching that I'm able to chase my own dreams and create videos like this one. So make sure you say mangoes in the comments so I know you're a real one.